Valerie. Today I wanted to go over some of the aviation instructor responsibilities and also talk about professionalism. Most of the content of this lesson that we talk about today is in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, Chapter 8. You can find this on the FAA website or simply Google FAA AIH Chapter 8 and you'll find the PDF. So if the DPE asks, what is the job of an aviation instructor? The very quick one-sentence reply is to transfer knowledge. In the FOIs, or Fundamentals of Instruction, you've probably studied how people learn, the process of teaching, and various teaching methods like the lecture method, the guided discussion method, and demonstration performance method. All of these methods are used to help the student, or the learner, as the FAA likes to call students, meet and exceed established standards. So the first thing we're going to talk about, the FAA has 5 main responsibilities of aviation instructors. These are 1. Helping learners learn, 2. Providing adequate instruction, 3. Demanding appropriate standards of performance, 4. Emphasizing the positive, and 5. Ensuring aviation safety. Those I would say are definite memory items. I will talk about each one briefly and then re-summarize. So the first responsibility of an aviation instructor is helping learners learn. You can do this by making lessons a pleasurable and enjoyable experience and interesting. It's not your job as a CFI to entertain your student, and you shouldn't sacrifice necessary standards, but you want to keep your students interested and engaged. Part of this is just good people skills. The second main responsibility of aviation instructors is to provide adequate instruction. The FAA says here that the instructor should analyze the learner's personality, thinking, and abilities. People learn at different rates. If you have someone who's nervous, and I'll admit I was really nervous in my first couple of lessons, this is not the place where, as the CFI, you point this out. Now, if there is absolutely no progress, if the student is too nervous to take the flight controls, then maybe we need to consider if they really want to be learning to fly. But especially in those initial first few lessons, you are not discouraging the student, you're taking as much time as needed, and it may be just about developing self-confidence rather than learning the fundamentals. If someone needs to do 2 to 3 lessons to learn straight and level flight before moving on to stalls, then that's perfectly fine. In the AAH, it says, for learners who exhibit slow progress due to discouragement or lack of confidence, instructors should assign more easily attained goals. Okay, moving on to number 3, standards of performance. When you take a check ride, the established standards are either the Airman Certification Standards, the ACS, or the Practical Test Standards, the PTS. The FAA loves to emphasize that these documents are testing documents and not teaching documents. And you'll see a few knowledge test questions about this. But when it is time for check ride preparation, these are your standards. The fourth main responsibility of an aviation instructor is to emphasize the positive. There have been plenty of instructors who have turned off student pilots. I would say there needs to be particular care in the first few lessons when you as an instructor do not know the student. The FAA also says very clearly in this chapter that nothing in aviation demands that learners suffer as part of their instruction. Some of the things you can do to emphasize the positive is to offer to take a photo of the student after a flight or point out a couple of interesting landmarks in the local area when you're out flying. Now, you're not giving scenic tours, but your students are going to tell their friends and family members about their lessons. And if they are able to say they flew over the Temecula wineries or flew past the Hollywood sign, whatever interesting landmarks there are where you teach, those are just little things that can make the lesson more fun. You can also ask the student where they live, and if it's a safe spot, for example, not on the approach path of another airport, you can take them over their house. Offer to take their controls if they want to take a photo, and of course, emphasize safety at all times. Which brings us to the fifth main responsibility of an aviation instructor, ensuring aviation safety. Here, you should practice aviation safety and accident prevention at all times. So the flying over the student's house example, good opportunities here to talk about emergency landing areas, safe altitudes, etc. So to circle back and summarize, the FAA has 5 main responsibilities of aviation instructors, which are helping learners learn, providing adequate instruction, demanding appropriate standards of performance, emphasizing the positive, and ensuring aviation safety. Next, we will talk about minimizing learner frustration. A lot of students quit flying because they just get frustrated, or they take breaks and their instruction gets dragged out much longer. So as an instructor, you can encourage learning rather than discourage learning. Most students are either on a goal track or a career track and want to finish. There's the occasional student that really just enjoys getting in the air and flying with an instructor, and that's fine, but that's not your norm. You can help your students see an end in sight by encouraging them. I personally had an instructor early on that wanted to go to a certain regional airline, and he talked about this airline every single lesson and how he was like 100 hours away or 90 hours away. It really frustrated me. It made me compare my starting line to his finish line, and he really made me feel like I was just his ticket to some flying hours. All he could think about was his airline interview, and after a few lessons, I changed instructors. The FAA says that as an instructor, you can minimize learner frustration by motivating learners, keeping learners informed, approaching learners as individuals, giving credit when due, criticizing constructively, being consistent, and admitting errors. You're going to see all of these in just a little bit when we talk about instructor do's and don'ts. So memorizing that list I just read is a good idea. Okay, next let's talk about some of the additional responsibilities of flight instructors. These are beyond the first 5 main responsibilities. So the second chunk, the additional responsibilities of flight instructors are evaluation of learners' piloting ability, pilot supervision, practical test recommendations, flight instructor endorsements, additional training and endorsements, pilot proficiency, see and avoid responsibility, and learners' pre-solo thought process. So out of those 8, just want to talk about the practical test recommendations and making sure the flight instructor has provided flight and ground instruction for each item included in the ACS PTS. There are 14 important special emphasis items, which are positive aircraft control, procedures for positive exchange of flight controls, stall and spin awareness, collision avoidance, wake turbulence and low-level wind turbulence and wind shear avoidance, runway incursion avoidance, controlled flight into terrain, aeronautical decision-making and risk management, checklist usage, spatial disorientation, TFRs or temporary flight restrictions, SUAS or special use airspace, aviation security, and wire strike avoidance. The FAA has a figure in Chapter 8 of the AIH with teaching tips from veteran flight instructors. I think this is worth a glance for everyone, but not going to go into it here. There are 12 of them, and these are not anything you need to have memorized. The 2 that stood out to me was to use a video to rehearse pre-flight briefings until your delivery is polished. If you're a new CFI, this is absolutely a good idea, and for your check ride prep too. You're going to have to brief the DPE. This should come off relaxed and easy. And then, okay, one more point, also encouraging learners and your students to establish personal minimums. I think this is so important and something good to talk about with your students, or on your check ride, talk to your DPE about how you will be talking about this with your students. So next, the FAA has their Instructor Dues and Instructor Don'ts. I will read through these. You may recognize the second half of the dues list as the list we talked about in minimizing learner frustration. These are good to have memorized or close to memorized so you're comfortable talking about them. So the instructor dues are be professional at all times, be sincere, present a professional appearance and personal habits, maintain a calm demeanor, practice safety and accident prevention at all times, avoid profanity, define common terms, continue professional development, minimize learner frustration, motivate the learner, keep the learner informed, approach each learner as an individual, give credit when due, criticize constructively, be consistent, and admit errors. And the Instructor Don'ts: don't ridicule the learner's performance, don't use profanity, don't model irresponsible flight behaviors, don't say one thing but do another, don't forget personal hygiene, don't disrespect the learner, don't demand unreasonable progress, don't forget the learner is new to aviation jargon, don't set the learner up for failure, and don't correct errors without an explanation of what went wrong. Okay, so moving on to professional development, you might get a question like this on your CFI check ride. How can an instructor stay current with knowledge? Now, you may think you're flying around in a 40-year-old airplane with the same instruments that they used 40 years ago. What has changed? Yes, the 4 fundamentals of flight haven't changed, but a lot of things have changed. Like in the last few years, the PTS has become the ACS. We have something called Basic Med available. And what about ADSB? The FAA has a document, What's New and Upcoming in Airman Testing, that specifically talks about what's been added to testing. So for example, in 2020, there are new test questions on the knowledge exams about FICON NOTAMs and ADSB out. The FAA wants current instructors, not outdated instructors. So a huge way you can stay current is to keep up with the FAA seminars and publications, and also with other education programs put out by aviation industry organizations like AOPA and Safe Pilots. That's all I have for today. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have questions, comment below. If this video was helpful, please like and subscribe.